Welcome to this week's edition of Dugout Dish Podcast. I'm Andy Kirikidis, joined by my wonderful co-host Keith Glasser. How we doing?
Great. How are you?
Good, man. We're gonna take a little bit of time here, and we're gonna unpack the world of college baseball pitching, and we're gonna hit it from a couple different angles. I don't think it gets talked about enough because high school and college pitching is how things work is incredibly different. Most high school programs are going to have 3 or 4 guys that they throw. And, you may have a 5th or a 6th if you're a pretty talented team. But I want to start with kind of the makeup of a staff first. And then we can get into kind of the bulk of this, which I know you've got some stuff pulled up, but start talking about innings distributions and that different kind of stuff, which I think sheds a lot of light on coaches are trying to win, and they're going to throw guys that are going to help them win. But from a staff perspective, right, you got the 40-man roster for one more year, but like when you get down to 34, like you're probably looking at 17 or 18 guys on a staff. We'll just ballpark it there. Would you say that's a fair number?
Yeah.
You might see somebody go 19, 19, 15. I think that's probably a little bit low positionally, but like we'll call it 18. We'll call it 18 for the sake of the argument here. And you've got 3 conference games a weekend, and you usually have 1 midweek game. So generally, you're going to, and there's a few outliers to this, which I don't even know if it's worth digging into too much with the pod system. And honestly, I would want to talk to some people about it so we could hit it perfect. But basically, you're going to have three conference starters. You're going to have your midweek starters. So there's 4 of your 18 guys, right? Those are the dudes you're going to run out regularly during the week. You probably got a swing dude who's like your 5th guy. So there's your like kind of your 5 long guys, if you will, guys who are going to throw kind of your starters type innings. You're going to have, maybe a designated closer, but let's call it three dudes at the back end of the game for the 7th, 8th, and 9th, maybe a 4th if you're really deep, that are going to throw kind of those high leverage 7th, 8th, 9th inning type of innings. And then you're going to have 1 or 2 guys that are kind of like your up big, down big guys that you want to develop, and you want to make sure you get those guys innings, or maybe you're trying to bring them along for a bigger role as far as the year goes. But, you start doing the math on that, and you're looking at 10 to 13 guys who are going to throw the bulk of the innings for the season. And I would say in a lot of cases, most staffs really want to lean on like 10 dudes. And then there's a couple guys who are going to throw some of those bridge innings. So, as far as staff makeups go, you're probably going to have 5 or 6 guys on every single college staff that really aren't going to factor into much of anything over the course of a year. And that's really just the reality of it. Like, coaches, there's not enough innings to go around when you're talking about trying to win games. So something to be cognizant of as you are going through this process is that when you get to campus, like, you need to earn every inning you get. And it's not about, well, I'm a freshman, I want to be a weekend starter. Like, well, no, like, first you need to prove that you can compete at that level. And for those of you who listen to the podcast, or I guess even the ones who maybe this is your first episode, go back and listen to the episode we did with Matt Hobbs at Arkansas, excuse me. And he breaks down how he kind of views freshmen as they come in and how they have to be able to check certain boxes before they can really compete with them. Fastball percentages, breaking ball percentages, composure, handling the running game, and boxes they need to check before they even have a chance to break into that 10, 11, 12 guys that are going to throw the bulk of those innings. So it's not a situation where you have 18 guys and 18 guys get to throw. There might be guys on that staff that don't throw an inning all year long, or maybe they only throw 1 or 2 innings a whole year. Kind of throwaway innings where, you don't want to burn somebody in a specific situation. So you want to give somebody a chance to go out there and heat it up a little bit, see what they can do. But I know you're going to break this down, but the bulk of the innings are going to go to about 10 or 12 guys.
Yeah. I did a semi-deep dive with my history degree. Sorry for dropping my phone, everyone. That's what you heard. I was doing some math, which I'm not good at, which is why I was a history major. It depends, obviously, right, on the division. Division one, because they can play 56 games, and then if you make the conference tournament, regionals, supers, World Series, like you're going to play more innings. You're just going to play more innings in general because you're playing 56 to the 52 at the Division two level, 50 at the Division two level, and the 40 at the Division three level, right? So as you go down, the less innings there are available. In general, and we are speaking in very generalities here, and the Division one, on average, and I went through about 12 to 15 teams at each division across, World Series champions, to regional teams, to just, regular teams that didn't even, make the conference tournament. In general, Division one, was averaging between 11 and 13 guys that took up the bulk of the innings. And when I'm talking bulk of the innings, it's going to be about 90+% of those innings. Division two was around, 9 to 12. And Division one was like 9 to 11, or Division three, was like 9 to 11 of guys who take up the bulk of those innings. So if you have a rather large pitching staff and you're into, 15, even if it's 15, right? Like, if you're at the Division three level and there's 15 arms and 11 guys are throwing 90+% of the innings, like in some instances, there was like on average, if there was, 16 or 17 guys listed on the stat sheet, like it broke out to like 2 1/3 innings that were available left amongst the other 6, 7, 8 guys that were on the stat sheet. And some of those can get thrown off a little bit because you might have someone who ends up spot starting and, they throw 10 innings. And now all of a sudden it goes from 2 1/3 to 1 1/3 or 1 2/3 that are available. And it's something to think about in the recruiting process because, if you are, and very rarely are there going to be guys that are going to set foot on campus and immediately be weekend starters, right? Like, are they out there? Yes, there are, but they are the exception, not the rule. Like most guys are going to have to be able to develop into those roles to be able to really handle the load, the pitching, the crowds, all of that type stuff. And like I was just doing some quick math, like Misericordia, who won the Division three World Series, their 3 starters, they had a guy who started 13 games and had 15 appearances, 16 games, 18 appearances, 12 games, 12 appearances. Those 3 guys accounted for 57% of the innings that were thrown. 57% of the innings thrown were thrown by 3 players on that team. And, there's 16 pitchers listed. So that means that there's 13 other arms that are available for what's that, 43%? Did I do my math right?
You did.
Look at me, huh?
You're so good at math.
So like that's, it's somewhere around, give me 1 second here. I mean, that's around 18 innings a piece for those guys. Now, that's not going to be the case, right? Like, not all of the rest of those guys are only going to throw 13 innings. Like, there's guys on here with 43 innings and 33 innings and 24 innings, 28 innings. Like, those obviously start eating into everyone else. So it's something that rarely gets talked about. And I think it's a little bit of a shock for people when they get to colleges or they're going through the process and they're talking to coaches like, yo, how many pitchers do you carry? Like, well, we carry 18 arms. And I think sometimes it's shocking, like, whoa, because in high school, like you usually have 3, 4, maybe 5. And like, they're not all pitchers. They're guys who can throw strikes in high school, unless you go to a really, really good high school and like there's guys. But by and large, like, you don't have no high school in the country, to my knowledge, unless it's IMG, has a staff of 18 arms that are going to legitimately be able to go out there and throw. So when you start looking at it that way, and with the amount of games that are played, there's only X amount of innings that are available. And the guys who are starting are going to take up a good chunk of those innings. And then It's going to be the first arm out of the pen. It's going to be second arm out of the pen. It's going to be matchup guy. It's going to be up big, down big guy. It's going to be, your closer. Like you might see somebody who has 15 appearances and 15 innings because they come in and shut the door in the ninth. But no one's supplanting that guy. Like those 15 innings are his 15 innings. So there's a lot that goes into it. And I think that like pulling the veil back a little bit on this and it's not a bad thing, right? Like this isn't something that is negative. It's just the reality of what college baseball is. Like you play a lot of games, you need a lot of arms, but that also means there's so many innings available for all of those arms to throw over the course of the year and develop.
Yeah, I think the role thing is where I think a lot of high school kids get thrown off because there's not many kids who go and pitch in college that were specialized guys in high school, right? Like It's really just that simple. Like most of them were starters and they got the ball and they, went 6 innings or 7 innings or whatever, and they just kind of run with it. But you get to college, and once you get past that kind of starter role, and then you have your back end guys, everything else in between is a role that you can carve out. Like if you're a left-handed pitcher, like you might be a lefty matchup guy your first time out. You might throw in third inning increments where you literally come in to face one guy, or maybe there's back-to-back lefties and you come in to face 2 lefties and get out of that inning, whatever it is. It's a very different system than kids are used to in high school, period. And the kids who are able to adapt to it and lean into, I need to find a way to get innings as opposed to I need to be a starter or I need to be, find a way to gain the trust of that coach to go on the mound in any situation. Being the up big, down big guy is a role. It's not the coolest role, but if you're the up big, down big guy and you go in and you throw really well, you will get a bigger role or a more important role. That's a way for you to prove that you belong because those innings still do matter. They may be less pressure. A lot of times it's a guy that has arm talent that maybe struggles with command a little bit, or maybe struggles with the running game, and you're less concerned with the repercussions of some of those rough patches that he may have. So you throw him in those situations. Well, that's where a kid can get better, right? There's a reason that coaches identify guys who pitch in those spots is because it's probably somebody they think has a chance. Are you a guy who can bounce back and throw on back-to-back days? Huge value, right? The dude who can throw an inning on Friday, an inning on Saturday, and can give you another one on Sunday because he bounces back really good. Like that guy's worth his weight in gold when you get into a college season. The other thing that I think is important is to kind of unpack what coaches, kind of how this works with coaches. And it seems when you're watching games, and it seems like this in the big leagues too, but I think big leagues is a different animal. But like you watch college baseball, and it seems like these coaches are making decisions on the fly, right? Somebody runs down to the bullpen and they go to get loose. Most of these decisions are made before the game starts, right? And yeah, you obviously change course based on certain things if that's what pops up. But little peek behind the scenes, when you get into a weekend or you're prepping for a game, you're sitting down with your coaching staff, or at least this is what I've been a part of. Then you have those conversations of who can throw today. You start there. Like we played yesterday, we played a Friday night game, and Jimmy John threw 36 pitches to close that game out. Is he hot today? Because if we use him today, we don't get him on Sunday. So like you start making decisions like who's even on the hot list. You're even talking about how much did a guy throw in the bullpen? Like, hey, we got so-and-so up twice yesterday and he didn't throw. So if we're going to use him, we got to use him today, right? You start to have those conversations, and then you start walking through scenarios. All right, say so-and-so gets us to the 7th and it's a 1-run game. Who's our guy? Who's the spot here? Say we're getting into a situation where they've got a string of lefties coming up. Who's our guy that we're going to go to get to here? Who's our up big, down big guy? Who's the guy we're going to if our starter gets roughed up a little bit, but the game's not out of hand yet? but we need to eat, we need to fill those middle innings. Like we need somebody who can give us 9 outs or 12 outs. Like who are we throwing in that situation that can keep the game tight and give us a chance to run back and just continue to play our game offensively? Like all these conversations are happening well before that game starts. And you want to be a part of the conversation. I mean, there's guys that, you know, when I was at William and Mary, we would sit down to have these conversations, and there's guys that literally never popped up because they were never really going to be an option. So, you know, just from a coach's perspective, I think it's important to understand that this stuff isn't, we're not looking at each other on the bench going, well, hey, Keith, looks like so-and-so's losing his command right now. Who do you think we should throw into the fire and run him down to the bullpen, right? Does somebody have a pitch limit, right? Early in the season, you know, you got your opening weekend. You're probably not running your starter out there for 100. So, like, if you do some math, like, hey, he's going to throw the ball good today. He's usually good for 20 pitches an inning. He's only going 80. He's not starting an inning after 70 pitches. Like, who's the guy who's going to get us to the back end, right? All this stuff gets talked about. It all gets mapped out. And do things change during the course of a game? Yeah, of course they do. But it's not this whimsical, like, hey, let's throw this guy in this situation. Like, it's very thoughtful. It's very thought out. And there's a plan that gets put into place for these situations. And you do the best you can as a coach to already have that thought process done so that when we're in the dugout, you already can kind of see what the tea leaves are showing you. They're like, hey, doesn't look like he's going to get through 5 today. Like, we need to get so-and-so up. It takes him a little bit longer to get hot. So why don't we get him down there this inning and give him 2 full to really go through his full routine, and we'll get him set up with a clean inning in the 6th if everything goes good. Like, you're always trying to find ways to manage your staff where you're giving them the best chance possible to be successful, and like knowing your players and knowing what they're capable of. How do they get loose? Can they come in a dirty inning? Do they need a clean inning to feel good? All that stuff gets taken into account. But you got to be a part of the conversation, which is you need to find a way to get into that 10 or 12. Because as you said, if you're not one of those 10 or 12, there's not many innings to go around.
No, there's not. And that's very in-depth analysis there. Like, it is before every game, you're going in and you're writing names on the dugout chart of who's up. And you're having conversations not only with your coaches, but with the kids of like, hey, if we get into this spot here, I need you ready. Like, right now, this is like, you know, and that's happening pregame, that's happening during the game. That's a constant conversation that's going on, or it should be a constant conversation that's going on. And there's going to be times where, like, you know, hey, and these are conversations that happen in real time where it's like, hey, I know I told you that you were going to get the 7th, but we just put up a 5 spot in the 5th. And if we go out there and I want you to go down there and just start moving your body around. But if we shut the door here and we're up 5 in the 7th, like, I'm going to go to someone else because I want you available for game 2 or game 3, whatever it might be. But that doesn't mean you like leave the bullpen. That's like, but if they climb back in, like, I need you hot. And it's, you know, baseball is very, you know, and this is always a cop out. I would always say this when I was coaching, like, you know, it's a cop out answer, but like, it's so situationally driven what you're doing. And you're trying to come up with every single scenario that you could possibly think of in your head about what you're doing. And that plan could all be for naught once the second pitch of the game is thrown. You know, so there's, yes, you're 1,000% right. You want to be in the conversation of, okay, who's available today? What are we doing? This is, you know, and I think you touched on something that was huge. Like, you know, we got this guy up twice in game 1 on Friday. Like, how many pitches did he throw down there? Like, is he going to be okay to throw today, or should we put him down today and use him fresh on Sunday? And, you know, those are things that, like, you have to weigh, because you're going to kick yourself if he's not ready and he goes in and he's just not good. You know, so there's so much more that goes into it. And I think, you know, we always tell people all the time, like, go on the internet. Like, this stuff is available when it comes to, like, what the program can do, what coaches have done, how have they developed, how many All-Americans, all-region guys. But this stuff is available too. Just pull up the stat sheet and look. And like I have Tennessee pulled up right now, just an example, like, because they won the national championship. They threw 623 innings last year as a staff. 4 dudes threw 48% of those. It was almost 49% of those innings. Like and they have 18 guys on the stat sheet. So that means there's 14 guys available for the other 51 innings.
And there's no shortage. There's no shortage of arm talent on that roster.
No,
so
and that doesn't take
guys who help them win.
That doesn't take into account the 2 guys and I haven't done everyone because it's just we're doing this in real time. Like, that doesn't take into account 2 guys, one who spot started 5 times with 21 appearances, and one dude who literally spot started once and had 29 appearances, who threw over 100 innings combined. So that number alone is going to drop that, like, the overall, it's going to drop it to probably 30-ish% of innings that are left available for another 12 guys. So like, you start doing the math, like, you want to be in the conversation when 6 guys are comprising 60% of the innings. Like, yes, you're going to need more guys to throw, but you want to be in that conversation of, in that top 10 to 12 guys, where, like, okay, if we get here, this is what we're doing. If we get there, this is what we're doing. And, like, because this is the reality. And at the Division II and Division III level, doesn't mean the innings are less important or anything. Like, you still want to throw the high leverage innings. It just means that there's going to be less guys that are going to be available to throw all of those innings because you're playing less innings. Even if you end up in a regional, you're looking at throwing, high 300 innings. Same thing sticks. If you're, so if it's only 9 or 10 guys that are taking up 90% of the innings, and you have 17 guys on staff, that means 10% of innings are left for 7 guys. Like, there's only a finite number of innings that are actually available. And while we do have no time clock per se on baseball, like, there is a finite end to the game when it comes to how many innings you're going to play. And I should mention too, like, there are going to be less innings on like, obviously there's less on the Division III side because you're playing less games, but there are a lot more 7-inning doubleheaders that are played at the Division III level than you will see at the Division I or Division II level. Doesn't mean they don't happen, but there's certainly more on the Division III side than there is Division I. So, like, that's another thing to factor in too. Like, those 7-inning games, especially as you get later into the year, like, a lot of people are going to try to ambush that 7-inning game with their best arm. It's like, yo, he's going to get us at least 6. And if he has a clean game, like, 7 and 8, if we go extras, is not out of the realm of possibilities. So that's one game that goes to one guy. Now you have 2 more to play on the weekend, and if you have 11 guys that you're throwing on the weekend, that means you have 18 innings to get through with 10 guys. Like, if you're the bottom end of that roster, like, the chances of you legitimately getting innings in those weekend games are going to be small. You're going to get your work in midweek and inter squads when, things are going really well. Like, you might only be throwing inter squads, and you have to take that time seriously to really try to develop so that you can start inching yourself closer to the conversation of being one of those 11 guys. Like, maybe you're 12th. Go be really good in a midweek when you get the opportunity to do it. That might get you more innings. It's the same thing we talked about earlier with position guys. Like, if you want to get in the lineup, be really good defensively. Same thing from a pitching standpoint. Like, you could be 12th or 13th on the pitching chart. Like, be really good every time you go out there, because that's going to inch you closer, because not everyone's perfect when they take the mound. And you are what you like, recency bias is a real thing in baseball. Like, hey, he was really good last week when we gave him the ball. This guy hasn't been really good the last 3 times we gave him the ball. Let's give it to him and see what happens. You might all of a sudden find yourself getting more high leverage innings by being able to do that. This is in no way, shape, or form setting this up for people to be like, oh my God, I don't want to be the 15th guy because there's no innings available. This is just the reality of what it is. And what you do with your innings when you get them will dictate how fast you can move up that chart in order to be in that conversation.
You make a really good point around the 7 inning game. And I mean, shoot, we could take it back to when we played.
Yeah.
You threw your best starter in the 7 because the expectation was that dude's CGs.
Right.
And now you only used one guy to win a game.
Especially later in the year when pitch counts aren't necessarily, not that pitch counts are never a thing, right? Like that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is a 7 inning game, your number one guy can likely get through a 7 inning game in like 80 to 80, between 80 and 90-ish pitches. So if you have to extend them out to 100, 105, it's not a big ask in that. And the other thing is, and I'll say this because it is what it is, but like in college, you're built up to do that. You're built to go 100 pitches if need be. Doesn't mean you get there all the time. Doesn't mean it's a thing that happens every single time you toe the rubber, but you're built to do it. And, some guys can handle it, some guys can't. But the expectation and the reality when you play in those 7 inning games, like I did it when I was at RPI. It happened when I coached at RPI. Like most people would try to throw their best arm in the 7 inning game because it's 7 innings. And that guy you can burn one guy in a 7 inning game. And, it's a catch-all because you have, generally speaking, they would go 9-7-9, right? Like when you play the threes or 3-game sets, you'd go 9-7-9. If you win game 1 and you use 3 or 4 arms, like, hey, we're in really good position to sweep on day 1 and win the series because our guy's going in game 2. You could also burn 2 guys in game 1 and then game 2 gets away from you for whatever reason because it happens in this game. If you burn 2 arms in a 7 inning game, you're still in really good shape going into game 3 because I burned my starter and 2 other, like if you're down big, like maybe you just go to your guys like, hey, this is a throwaway, like not a throwaway game. I don't want to say it that way, but let's throw some guys and see what they can do in this situation. And maybe they keep us in the game and whatever, but you're not burning your best bullpen arms in that game. So then you can reset on Sunday with a lot, your guy who threw game 1 out of the bullpen can come back on Sunday. And then you also have the rest of your bullpen available. And now it's like, all right, like, we have 15 arms, we have 8 arms to their 3. Like, I like our odds here in this game. And we talked about it all the time when I was coaching, like, our goal was to chase the starter as quickly as we possibly could. The quicker you can get into the bullpen, the better your chances of winning a series is. Because, again, we're talking about innings available. Like, when you have your 10, 11 guys, if I can get into 12, 13, 14, like the chances of us winning that game when I'm throwing 1 through 6 are pretty high. So it goes both ways from an offensive standpoint as well. But I just think that like the 7 inning game, we would be remiss not to talk about it. And I thought about it as we were actually recording here, that you have way more, that you're really only burning 1, like maybe 2. And when I say 2, like it's likely going to be your closer if it's a tight game. And your guy might have thrown more pitches than you anticipated him throwing, and you burn your closer for an inning. So it's that 7 inning game is a little bit of a game changer in this conversation as well.
Well, I mean, think about this, right? You're playing a 9 inning game. If the opposing team starter goes 7 innings, probably not winning that game. Because that means he was throwing well enough to throw 7 innings. That means he got to his pitch count. Like that was something that we used to always talk about at William and Mary is like people like, oh, you gotta drive up his pitch count. It's like, well, if that dude gets to his pitch count, we probably didn't score any freaking runs.
Right.
Like most guys get knocked out of games not because of pitch counts. They get knocked out of games because they give up runs. Right. If we're playing, Matt Batts was a dude at UNC Wilmington. I don't think he ever made it to the big leagues, but he was a freaking wizard. 4-pitch dude, just super heavy mix, really, really tough. And like, if that dude showed up in the 7th inning, like you probably scored 1 run. Like if he towed the rubber in the 7th, you got it stuffed on you. Like starters don't get into the 7th. It's a very odd scenario where a starter goes into the 7th against you and things are in a pretty good spot from an offensive perspective, right? Like it's one of those where like maybe each team had a big inning and they just wrote out their starter and like there's scenarios, but most of the time, if the starter comes out for the 7th, offensively, it was not a very good day for you. We used to always talk about winning the middle innings. Like if you can win 4, 5, and 6, and you can get that starter out, there's no pitcher that there's not many guys that coaches want to go to in the 4th inning.
Mm-mm.
So like if you can get to those guys, if you can get to the middle guys and avoid the back end, because you get to college, the starters are good. The back end guys are really good. Like, especially you watch college baseball now, like you get to the back end of a game at high end college baseball, like good freaking luck. Like you hear all these old heads talking about, well, kids can't hit anymore. It's like, well, I don't think it's really that. I think some of these arms, the stuff is so good. Like if they get to their closer in the 9th, or they get to their bridge guy in the 7th, a guy that they really like those at bats become really, really hard. So when you're talking about it from an offensive perspective, for me, it was always like, you don't get the starter out because you pitch count him. You get him out because you put up some crooked numbers. So that's my stance on pitch counts. I think they're horse shit. When it comes from an offensive perspective, right? Like, pitch counts are something to be mindful of as a pitching coach, but from offensively, like I didn't want to talk about, well, let's get him, if we can get him to his pitch count, it's like we lost if he gets to 100.
Yeah, no, I agree. And the other thing too that I want to touch on, and I would be remiss not to mention this in the context of this conversation, is that, if you're on a team where you are going to a regional or a super or the World Series, roster limits come into play there too, right? So like you can only take X amount of players to a regional, to a super regional, to a World Series that are going to be available to pitch. And that's, again, to your point earlier about being in the conversation, like you want to be in the conversation to be on those rosters. You're like, you might be the 15th arm, but if they're taking 15 arms, you want to be that 15th arm. So you want to be able to do everything in your power in the innings that you're getting to be able to be that guy. That doesn't mean that you're going to end up pitching in any of those matchups, but it's far better being on that roster and being in the dugout wearing your uniform than it is sitting on the outside or sitting at home or going to summer ball and watching your team play on ESPN. So it's there's a lot of different things at play when it comes to this stuff. But I was thinking about this the other day, and I texted you. I just thought this would be an interesting thing to kind of talk about. That I don't necessarily think that people realize how many arms are actually on a college staff, and then subsequently how many arms actually throw the bulk of those innings, and what you need to do in order to be in position to throw some of those high leverage innings. Because ultimately, like, let's be honest, and I think you can pull this back to the recruiting process too. Like, if you're being recruited by a team and you go on the roster and look, and they have 19 arms on their staff, and you're going to be the 20th, and you're also being recruited by a team that has 15 arms, and they're telling you that they think that you can come in and compete for innings right away. Like, I know what my answer is. Like, I want to go be a guy on a team that is, if all things are equal, like I want to go be on a team where the guy, like, I'm going to have an opportunity to throw a lot of innings because I can develop more. I'm going to be able to throw in game, and I have a little bit more leeway to fail without fear of not being able to get the ball again. And there's something to be said about that. Like it's great to be able to say that, you went to, a really, really good baseball school, but you'd never played, and you could have went to another school. The transfer portal obviously makes things a little bit different nowadays, but, I think especially at the Division II and the Division III levels, like if all things are equal and you're being recruited by, multiple schools, and, you're being told you're going to be a guy who can come in and compete right away, or like, hey man, if you get into school, like, we'll see what happens. Like, they're telling you right there. And if it was me, like, I want to go in and compete and see what I can do, not just be a guy who has a jersey that can stand in the dugout and throw bullpens once a week and maybe get into a game my freshman year. Like, I want the ball, give it to me. So I think that those are things too that you want to take into consideration when you're going through the recruiting process, especially if you're an arm, kind of going through this and looking at it like, okay, like how many guys in this program take up the bulk of the innings. Like, all right, there's 19 guys on the stat sheet. 3 of them graduated and they're bringing in another 5 arms. Like, okay, do the math. And, oh, look, last year, all the guys are returning that threw 55% of the innings. Like, okay. And there's only 6 of them. So that leaves another, 45% of innings for 17 guys. You can do the math there and kind of figure it out that way.
The only other thing I want to add, and this, I want to preface this with, this isn't a scare tactic, but I think that with the roster crunch now, if you're a college freshman, right, or you're a college player in general, or you're a high school kid who's getting ready to go play college next year, you have to find a way to get into that top 12 or prove that after your freshman year that you're a guy who can be in that top 12. Because the way that the portal works now, coaches are going to find guys they think are already ready to be in that top 12. And I don't think that any coaches are actively excited to cut guys. But especially when you get to the highest levels where winning is very pressure packed and you need to be able to win every year, these coaches are going to go into the portal to find guys that can fill that extra 45%. And in some cases, they might be looking for a guy who can be a part of that 55% that you were talking about, like going and get a weekend starter type of guy. I think it becomes increasingly important for young guys to take their development seriously, and you need to compete against the guys in your own uniform, right? And that's really where the bulk of your competition at the college level is. It's not the team in the other dugout. Like, they're your competition on game day, but your day-to-day competition is internal. And if you're one of those pitchers who's, you're this 16th or 17th guy and you're fighting for 5 innings a year, you need to figure out something to get in the mix, because you become very dispensable. Like, you're an easy guy to say at the end of the year, hey man, like, it's just not going to work out here. We're going to go get somebody else. And it's not a scare tactic, but I think with the roster limits now and the transfer portal, with those 2 things combined, coaches are going to constantly try to turn over that back end of that roster to find guys who can help them get a little bit deeper. And if you don't prove that you belong there almost immediately, like the days of freshman and sophomore getting 2 full years to develop into juniors to help out, I don't think there's going to be as many cases of that anymore. Like, if you get to the end of your sophomore year and you don't find yourself in the top 12 guys or top 13 guys, and there's not a clear path for you to be there as a junior, a lot of coaches are going to say, hey man, I just don't think it's going to work out here. And yeah, that sucks. It does. And I know that's a tough pill to swallow for a lot of people, but you have to understand that these are decisions that have to be made for the good of the program. And they're decisions that coaches ultimately are going to make. And feelings aren't going to be a part of the process. It's all about, can you help me win games? And you really got to find a way to get in the mix there, whether that's weight room, whether it's a throwing program, whether it's working with your pitching coach, whatever it is. Like, you constantly have to be pushing towards development, because coaches are going to turn over rosters a little bit more than they have in the past because of the transfer portal and the roster limits that's coming.
Well, I think that's true. And I think, to be clear, like, you're speaking more so at the Division I level than you are the rest of them.
Yes.
I think it's very true. I think it's gonna be way more prevalent there than it's gonna be anywhere else. Because at the end of the day, I think you're gonna start, and we could go down a rabbit hole here, but I think you're gonna start seeing this because coaches need to win to keep their jobs, ultimately, and this is an easy way to be able to kind of turn over rosters and get more people into the program that might be able to, ultimately get to that goal. And I do think there's going to be some things out there, whether it's going to be administration or alumni or whatever, that are going to start pressuring people. Like, why are they not winning? I don't understand why they're not winning. There's all these guys out there that are available, and you're almost going to have to, in one way, shape, or form, involve yourself in the portal in most, not all, in most schools at the Division I level, to be able to, and not only the portal, but JUCO guys as well, right? Like, it's, I think in some instances you're going to find programs that are going to be a little bit more JUCO heavy than they've been in the past, because you're going to be able to recruit some guys that have thrown 100 innings in their college career and are further along than the guy that's in your program that has thrown 6. And all things equal, the guy who's thrown 100 innings had a lot of success. I would give that guy the ball a little bit more, because to this point, in my eyes, in my program, you haven't been able to show me that you're good enough to go out there and do that for us. That doesn't mean that you're not going to be a college baseball player somewhere else. In some instances, maybe you're not, but it might be at a different level in a different program than the one you're currently in. I don't think this is something that is going to be taken lightly, and I don't think people are in love with the route this is going because of the rule change and the roster crunch and the being able to transfer wherever you want. But I also think that, like anything else in this world, you have what's available to you and you adapt or die. And I think that it's just a matter of time where the bottom end of the roster, both positionally and pitching wise, are going to be turned over year to year with some portal and JUCO transfers, more so than it's been in years past, because of what they're going to be able to do. It kind of used to be that you couldn't really get out of it unless kids left school, and now that you can freely transfer, it's just like, hey, it's not going to work out here. We're going to have to, and the other part too is like and I'm a fan of the 34-man roster, but coaches were able to actually err a little bit more with 40 and miss and be okay. Like, you can't really miss with 34 guys, because you start, you get hit by the injury bug, like you're in for a long season. You miss on a handful of guys that aren't very good. Like, you have a bad year, especially at the higher levels, like you're going to have, like, you need to turn it around in 365 days, actually less than that. So you're going to get rid of some guys that aren't able to help you, and you're going to go get some guys that can really help you win. And that's just kind of the nature of what it's going to be at that level. I don't think a lot of people are thrilled and in love with that, but at the same time, like, again, it is what it is, and this is where the game has gone, and it's what coaches are going to have to do to stay competitive and win. And unfortunately, there's going to be casualties along the way, whether it's by way of being decommitted and being dumped, so it's there, or just getting there and being told after a year or two that it's not going to work out. Like, it's going to happen. You're seeing it now. You're going to continue to see it. This isn't something that's going to go away overnight. It's just going to happen. And I think that if you're committed to a Division I school, like, you need to make sure that you're doing everything in your power to be able to be in that conversation before you even get to school. It's weight room, that's throwing programs, that's doing everything it is that you need to do, so that when you set foot on campus next August, like, I'm ready to go. And, because you don't want to give any indication that, hey, I took the summer off. Like, okay, guess what? There's a lot of other people in the country that didn't take the summer off that want to get out there and compete and win and get after it. Like, you're stepping into a super hyper competitive environment, and you need to understand that, and you need to be able to do everything it is in your power before you get to campus, and then even more when you get to campus, to prove that you actually belong there. Otherwise, you might find yourself having some tough discussions and some tough decisions on the horizon.
Well said, friend. Well said. Anything else you want to add on this particular topic?
I want to legitimately reiterate that it's not a, I don't want people to walk away from this and be like, oh my goodness, this is scary. Because in some instances it is, right? Like if you have no idea and this opened your eyes, like, awesome, good. I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you're getting this information. The second part is, it's we wanted to do this because this is just, we know this as being former college coaches, and we know that this is just a part of the game. This was a part of our careers that we did all the time. And I think being able to shed a little bit of light on it, it's no different at any program in the country. Like, you're not going to walk into a program and it's like, hey, everyone here throws the same amount of innings. Like, that's not what happens. So because there's so many innings to be played in the year, obviously the vast majority are going to go to the starters. And then after that, like, you want to be in that discussion of, if you're not a starter, like, let's say there's 4, like, you want to be in that discussion of the other 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 guys that are going to be getting the bulk of those innings. Whereas if you're not, you need to be able to figure out, have some tough discussions, not only with your coaches, but also with yourself about what it is that you need to do in order to be able to pitch in the college game. And I do think that, we've touched on this before with a lot of pitching coaches. We've talked about it ourselves. Like, it's not always the pitching aspect of things that might keep you from towing the rubber in game. It could be holding runners. It could be defense. It could be pace. It could be a multitude of things. It's not cut and dry of just like, well, you don't throw hard enough. Like, okay, like, we can work on that if you don't throw hard enough, but you can command the ball and you have a breaking ball and you can get some outs and you get weak contact. Like, we can work with that a little bit. But, if you're a 1-9 and you can't quicken up and not be a 1-9, like, you're not going to find yourself pitching, because you might as well just put somebody on third base when they get to first base. Like, that's just what the college game is. Like, anybody can steal on a 1-9. That's, you're even if your catcher's a 2-0 thrower, like, it's a 3-9, 4-0. Like, there's a lot of people who can steal second base on that, and third base for that matter. If you can't defend the bunt, especially if you're going to throw late in the game, people still bunt in college. If you can't defend and you can't get an out and you don't know what to do with the ball, not going to find yourself on the mound. You can't pitch out. You can't. I was going to say you can't intentionally walk somebody, Robbie Ryan, but that now we can just put people on. But you can't pitch out. You can't do some of those little things. Like, you can't get the signs from second base and how many looks you're going to give. Like, it's all those little things that start adding up. You don't know where you're going to be on. Like, you're backing up the wrong base. You don't back up. You show up your teammate. Like, there's a lot of things that go into it at the college level, other than just velocity and the ability to throw a strike here and there with some of your pitches. So, and it's very nuanced, and I hope that we open some eyes on this. So it's not, again, I don't want people to get scared about it. This is the reality, and for us, again, like, this is normal part of our careers for the 26 plus years that we've done this. So for us to, I thought it was interesting when I was thinking about it the other day. I was like, we should probably talk about this. Like, this is normal to us, but when you're going through this process and looking at it from the outside in, people probably have never thought about it this way. And it's one thing for us, like, we've talked about this, right? Like, you and I have talked about, like, yeah, you want to be in the top, like, 12 guys throwing, but it's a whole other thing to, like, go do a deep dive, like, go look at rosters, man. Like, Google machine is amazing. You can pull these out, you can pull stats up real quick and just do quick math and be like, damn, man, like, all right, there's 9 dudes on this roster of, 18 arms that threw 90% of their innings. Like, there's 9 guys who only got 10% of the innings. So all that information is available, but I think it's worth having the conversation and kind of looking at it through that lens, that it's not just, not everyone is going to go out there and throw 15, 20, 30 innings every year of their careers. Like, and that's not to say, like, some of these guys that, and I'm getting a little long-winded here, but it's also not to say that some of these guys on these teams that are, starting and threw 100 plus innings this year, like, they very well could have been a guy who threw 4 or 5 innings their freshman year, but they worked their way into that conversation. And then sophomore year, they threw 25 to 30 innings. And it's like, yo, he really developed. Like, that kid could start. And then by the time he's a junior, senior, it's like, yo, he threw 70. Now he threw 100. Those happen. That happens a lot more frequently than I think people think. It's not necessarily a death sentence, if you will, but to our point, to your point about the Division I stuff, like it could creep closer to that with what the new rule is and the roster crunch and things like that. But, it's really just figuring out and having tough conversations with yourself and your coaching staff about what it is that you need to do to be able to get given the ball.
Yeah, I mean, I think little peek behind the curtain. Probably makes sense to do one about position players in the near future here, because I do think there's a similar conversation to be had there around how that's constructed, how lineups are made, how you move through the season, platoon roles, left-handed hitters, right-handed hitters, all that kind of stuff. So maybe we'll put that on the docket.
Yeah, let's do it.
Well, that's all I got, Coach.
All right, anything else? I think we nailed it.
All right. Well, everybody, thank you for listening. Tune in next week. We will talk to you soon. Thanks, everybody. Thank you for listening this week. If you're watching on YouTube, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and smash that like button for us. Check us out on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, as well as Spotify. You can follow us on Twitter and Instagram at EMD Baseball. If you want to find out what me and Keith do to help families and players navigate the recruiting process, go ahead and check us out on emdbaseball.com. Take a few minutes to check out our new online academy. I promise you'll get some good information out of that. Thanks again for listening. Check in with you next week.